So now you're founder of Subgenre, focusing in strategy and distribution for brand-funded content.
Yep.
But I want to go back early in the career. How did you get into film?
Yeah, so I actually, as an undergraduate, thought I was going to be a neurosurgeon from the age of like 5 years old up until organic chemistry 2. And I hated organic chemistry, and I was not going to get to medical school with that. And I'm not making this up. The shortest line near that was the one for film studies. And I went to the film studies line and figured it would be a good elective. And it was a film theory history class, not production. But I fell in love. I always loved movies, but I really fell in love with them as an art form in that class. And I got really interested in alternate ways of storytelling. And so I kind of fell into the film history theory side of things, but I had an interest on the filmmaking side. And so I always kept kind of one foot in that arena. But I in the course of doing that, most people want to direct. And I learned that that wasn't my goal in life. Like I love the art form. I love to be involved in it, but I was more interested in the business aspects and the making it come together and kind of seeing the whole picture, which is more on the producing side. So I thought I would go more into that route. And at the same time, I was, in film school, and I got an internship at the Atlanta Film Festival, and that quickly grew into a programming job with the Atlanta Film Fest. And I started liking that part of the business, which to me is connecting great films with audiences. And so my career up until about 10 years ago was all in kind of the nonprofit sector, running film festivals, film organizations, that all in some way, I didn't really plan at this, but they were really about connecting films to a broader audience and having some impact with it. And when I got approached by a friend of mine who I knew unrelated to the film world whatsoever, who had become chief marketing officer at Patagonia, and they said they had made a film and needed help with it. I didn't realize at the moment, but it quickly became obvious that what I was really doing was figuring out how to get that film to an audience with the resources of a brand. And I really loved that aspect because brands can bring so much to the table that you don't traditionally have with independent film, which I've been working in. So that kind of shifted my arc over to the brand side, but it started in just regular film world stuff.
If you look at that chunk of your career and in that sort of programming film festival world, what did you learn about films and programming and connecting films with audiences that has really stuck with you?
Well, I think everyone would probably tell you this, but it's so much about a great story to begin with. And, you realize that outside of the biggest film aficionados who are going to try out anything, you're trying to get an audience in seats, and they're attracted by a great story that they're going to then tell other people you should see this too. And so that's the thing I always, to this day, remember is it's not just about like getting your mom to see it. It's about getting your mom to tell her friend to see it. It's good enough that they're going to say, you should see this, not just because my son produced it or something, It's got to be good enough that other people will want to see it too. And then I think another thing that I learned on the negative side was that most filmmakers are completely divorced from the marketing aspects of the film industry. They want to make the film and move on and let someone else do that. But they should be thinking about you want to make art and all of that, but you also need to think about how you're going to get it to an audience eventually. And no one was doing a good job at that. And even in the part of the world that's supposed to do that, like distributors and film festivals, they never put enough resources into the marketing side of things. And so I think that, I don't know what the actual number is, but there's some gap for most films between how many people see it and how many people probably would have wanted to see it, but never heard about it.
Right.
That maybe by working with good marketers, you could close some of that gap. And that's one of my big interests. And that overlaps with the brand space, but it's my interest with all films is like, how do you bridge that gap and get more people who should know about it to see it?
Friend from Patagonia calls, goes, "We have this film. How do we get it out?"
Yeah.
What do you do? Like, you've come from this world of film festivals. I'm sure you have a strong understanding of audiences and distribution to a degree from that, but brands weren't really making films like that at that time.
Right.
So what was that starting process of helping them navigate? How do we get this out?
Yeah. So one thing I skipped over is when I left the film festival world, I worked briefly in distribution
Okay.
as well. And I was really frustrated with a lot of that because I saw a lot of the inefficiencies and whatnot. And so when that friend called, my gut instinct was, wow, we can actually do some different stuff now and not follow all the rules of the film industry and how you distribute a film. And then I quickly learned that there were some of those rules we still had to follow because it's just the way the world's set up to work. So, for example, it's Patagonia who came to me and had this film Damnation that they wanted to take out, which is about dam removal, which is a somewhat obscure subject. Not everyone wants to necessarily go see. So how do you figure out getting people to see that? And at first, I was thinking we could skip some of the traditional film release pattern stuff, like doing a theatrical release. Maybe we only show it in Patagonia stores and we only show it with community centers and activists. And then I realized, talking to my publicist friend, that the film industry is just set up that film press is only going to write about it if it gets especially at that point, if it got a traditional theatrical release. So even though not a million people are going to show up for a documentary on a Tuesday during its week-long run, you still kind of have to do that release to get the film press to take it seriously. But at the heart of it, though, we were still able to break some rules and do some different things. And we were able to really think about how do you use all the resources that a brand has at its disposal to get attention for a film. And to this day, when I work with brands, we try to get them to strategize that way. Very few of them are able to do it the way Patagonia is able to do it, because at Patagonia, they've got buy-in from the leadership level down. So Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, was one of the impetuses behind that film and is still very interested in their film program. So from the top down, you've got someone telling every department to work together in unison. And so what I say is you can kind of fire all cylinders at once across all your marketing channels and your retail and your PR department. Every single piece of the puzzle can come together. And that's what made it work, was we literally were firing on all cylinders. So when that movie opened, we were using the front windows of every Patagonia store in the world to promote the movie. So it was like literally like billboards for your movie across the world. And it was in the catalog, and it was when you got a receipt at the store, there was a coupon code to rent the movie and get a discount. And anything you could think of that Patagonia made or did, they were able to use those resources to push the film. And that's what made it a huge success, and much bigger than any distributor would have been able to do with a film about dam removal. And I still try to get that into our strategy with any clients we work with now, but it's not always as easy as that, because a lot of departments are siloed, and getting the head of Instagram for a brand to collaborate with the film division and the retail people are wondering, why are we making this movie? And, we can get more into the nitty gritty of that, but sometimes it's hard to get everyone to work together. But when you do, it can be magical.
In that process, what did you learn about brands' abilities to make films like this, that they could make them and they could get them distributed, and there was an audience for them?
Well, I think what I learned there, I'm not sure if this answers your question, is that they still need to give up some creative control and let the filmmaker make a good film. And if they're willing to do that, then the brand can get a lot out of it, but they have to go into it knowing that it's not going to just be about selling a product. It's got to be about something bigger. And luckily, as I mentioned, in that case, it was coming from the top, and they were doing that film for a purpose-driven reason. And not every brand is starting that way. And so what I've learned is I've got to get the brands that I work with to make sure they're aligning what they're doing with their core values, so that then they have a reason to be doing it. And then they've got the permission to make a film and get it distributed, because it feels legitimate. It's more authentic to them as a brand, and doesn't have to be solely about selling a product. I just got lucky that was the case at the beginning, and then I learned that that's the best place to come from for almost anyone. But I got lucky that was the case at the beginning.
And so when you did that project, did subgenre exist at that point, or was that the sort of starting point of you going, oh, this brand space?
Well, Subgenre as a company existed, but it was doing independent films.
Right. Okay.
And I shifted it completely to the brand side as a result of that, because it was not just because of the work we did. It was because the filmmakers made a great film, and it was timely, and there's a lot of brands that had made films before that, and there's a ton of them making them now, but it was this moment where it kind of stood out as something new. And so all of a sudden I started getting called left and right by different brands that wanted to do the same thing. And so it just became an area that I was like, you know what, this is an area that is got a lot of potential. And if I can marry great filmmakers with great brands to tell great stories and then get them to a great audience, that's what I love. And so I shifted the entire business into only that. And now I don't even really work on independent films as a company. We stay focused on the brand side. And it just gives us a clarity with what we're doing as a company. So when I go and I'm selling a movie to Netflix or Hulu, they kind of know that I'm bringing them brand projects. Like, I'm not going to just be bringing them 20 other independent films at the same time. And they don't always want a brand project, but they're open to them. But they know that's what I'm bringing them, and I'm bringing them good brand projects. And so it's just helped keep things clean.
From your perspective, what opportunities do brands have to make this kind of content? Like, from your perspective, why should brands get into brand storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of brands feel like Patagonia is a bad case example to use because they're like what they call a unicorn, and they built the right to do that over time. And there is an element of truth to that, but it's also, I think, something that almost any brand can do if they take the long view. And you know, when Yeti came to me as a cooler company wanting to make films, you wouldn't have thought they were a unicorn company that could do that. And now people act like they are, but it was just a cooler and drinkware company. And they were able to make authentic brand. They took the time to strategize what makes this authentic to us. And they came up with a definition of the type of film that would be and what they had permission to make. And that's why it worked. And I think almost any brand can do that. And they just have to realize that I'm not saying any brand should quit making advertisements or quit doing other marketing or quit doing more, you know, performance-based marketing, anything like that. It all needs to be part of your repertoire. But one piece of the puzzle is building your brand and building brand loyalty and building a fan base for your brand, hopefully. And it's also about your employees, and your employees want to work, even if it's a bank, they want to work somewhere that stands for something and does something. And film's one of the best ways to get that across, whether it's to an audience, a consumer, or your employees, or potential customers, potential clients, because it enables you to showcase your values in a way that doesn't come through with the more product-centric or advertising-centric stuff, usually. There's exceptions to that, of course. But
when it comes to distributing brand funded assets. What opportunity do brands have that a traditional film wouldn't necessarily have access to?
Well, the first thing is they've got the resources usually and the know-how to do marketing. So, and in the film world, there's only a couple of companies that really understand below the studio level where they're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at the marketing.
Yeah.
There's only a few distributors that really understand marketing, and brands get marketing. And so they bring that to the table, and that's not just something they can bring to promote their own movie, but when you go to talk to a potential distribution partner, whether it's a Netflix or a Hulu or someone like that, or Magnolia Films that takes things to theaters and then to a streamer, they know that in the best case scenario, the brand's going to bring that marketing firepower. And in the even better case scenario, I guess, they're bringing a fan base. So they're going to pay more attention to those brands that have done that work to build the fan base and to build the trust through their films over time, because they know you're going to bring an audience, which is what they need. They need subscribers. They need an audience to show up, and you're going to help them do that. And not every film maker has built their own audience that way. And very few film companies have thought about themselves as a brand and done that. So they bring that as an opportunity. They also, you know, can do things that not every filmmaker can. So for example, it's not necessarily a bad thing to pay for distribution, like to get on a Roku or something like that, because you can still get huge audiences. And most filmmakers, that's not an option. You know, you're not going to have the money to pay for that aspect of your distribution. And a brand can bring that to the table as either a plan A, like thing they want to do from the start, or a plan B if they don't get distribution for their film, as a sale or a pickup, as they call it, from a streamer. They can still figure out a way to make a home for it. The other thing I think brands bring to the table that they don't take advantage of often enough is they don't necessarily need Netflix or Hulu, because if they do have an audience, and not every brand does, but if they do have an audience like a Patagonia does or an REI does, they can go direct to that audience and bypass all the things that the film world is bemoaning that are, you know, that we're having a hard time with in the distribution world right now. And a brand can say, we're still fine. We can still get to an audience. But only if they've already done a lot of hard work of building up a loyal customer base, essentially.
Do brands have better like non-traditional opportunities as well than like an independent film or even a studio film would when they try to activate it?
I think so, because the brands that I've worked with, I'm lucky, but I think a lot of brands are this way. They've got, again, multiple marketing resources to bring to it, but they've also often got a CSR arm or a foundation arm that gives grants to nonprofits and works with nonprofits, which they can then activate to come out to a movie, especially if it's a cause-based film. So they can suddenly say, we've now got a reason to activate this other arm of our company and the people that we work with, which not every filmmaker can bring to the table. And they have communication channels that, you know, are just a little bit different. Like when we did a recent film with John Deere about volunteer firefighters, it gave their CEO permission to write about that topic on LinkedIn, but that also was a marketing message for us at the same time that was bringing a business audience. And normally you wouldn't have a reason to talk about a film on LinkedIn necessarily, but that had a natural tie-in that a brand's able to bring to the table. And I think in the right scenarios, you know, when it's not pure advertising, it gives a new media angle to write about something. Like, why is a brand funding this? And you see those stories in the media, not just in business press, but in other places because people are intrigued, like, why would a brand be financing this? And that gives you another earned media opportunity that you don't necessarily get from just a traditional film. So I think there's a lot of things that they have access to and they can really take advantage of. I mean, retail-based corporations are some of my favorites because they can also activate their retail environment around the release of a film. And so the way we did that with Patagonia on the first film I ever did with them, we literally moved the clothes out of the middle of the aisle and installed projectors. And eventually we installed high quality projectors and sound in every Patagonia store around the world.
Oh
But
wow.
when we started, we had to kind of put it all together as we went. But people were like, wow, I get to go to a Patagonia store and watch a movie. And that was novel. Like it was a different thing than just going to the movie theater. And so people, like thousands of people came out to do that. And now it's a regular part of their release. And other companies have done it. Like Lou, who's here from, was with Home Depot. They did it in the lumber section of one of their stores that had been involved in a, involved in a hurricane, and so it had been affected, and the community had been affected. So having that screening in the lumber section was kind of like a perfect tie-in because it was natural to the rebuilding of the city and their own store. And that's something you just can't do with every movie. And I think when done right, it's something people find interesting.
For brands that haven't entered this space yet, or that look at the Patagonias and the Yetis and the REIs and go like, we don't know how to get to there. What advice do you have for brands thinking about, we want to tell stories, we want to make more impactful content, but we don't know how to get started?
Well, I think it is really about figuring out your core values and what core problems or issues are you trying to solve as a company in some way. And that could be something internally to your company. It could be a problem you're having that you're trying to get over to get more customers eventually, or it could be something you're trying to do as just public good in your community or whatever it may be. But figuring out what those are and making sure you're tying whatever you're doing to those core values is, to me, the most important thing. Is to start with like, what are our core values as a company? What's our mission? What are our goals? And strategically, what are we trying to solve as a company in the next year to 3 years? And then deciding what kind of film would help with those goals and solving those problems. And then I think it's very quickly finding a good storytelling partner. For me, I'm biased because I'm not the filmmaker. So a filmmaker would say, come to us as a filmmaker, we'll help you tell the best story. I think it's actually going to someone who's going to, before you figure out what that story is going to figure out strategically what you should be doing as a brand and who your core audience is and where does that audience watch things. Because maybe it should be on your YouTube, or maybe it should be on not a film, but something on TikTok, or maybe it is a film, but it needs to make sure, you need to know that it's going to hit this audience in this place. You need to think of those things before you even start making the film, I think. And in the best case scenario, you find a partner. It doesn't have to be me. Sometimes it is a filmmaker, but they're not just wearing their filmmaker hat. They're thinking not just what story do they want to tell, but what story is going to be most helpful to the brand. And I think that there's a lot of good people who come here and that's what they do. But there's also a lot of producers you can go to that they're really just telling the story they've been wanting to tell, and they probably pitched the same deck to 6 different brands, and it's not unique to that brand. And maybe it does kind of fit, but I think it's better when it's been built from scratch for the brand's purpose. It's still got to be a good story. It's still got to have an audience. But if it starts that core, it's going to be more successful for the brand. And I think with audiences too, because it's going to be more genuine.
You mentioned it earlier, but we view it very similar to how you do, which is like brand storytelling should be a piece of the puzzle, right? Advertising, performance marketing, like all of those pieces still play. But in a world where CMO turnover is getting faster and faster, and so many of these companies are judged on quarterly metrics,
Yep.
how do you have that conversation with a brand that this type of work can take 2 or 3 or 5 years to build that brand affinity and build that brand equity and lay those foundations to become that unicorn that a Yeti did?
Yeah, I think in the best case scenario, and we don't always get this lucky, but in the best case scenario, we're able to go in, and I say it's a small staff. I have 5 people total, and it's usually me and one other person at this stage. We're able to go in and really get an understanding of all those things about the brand, their goals and their mission and their problem points and their audience, and also learn that kind of stuff, their timelines and objectives, because it is going to do it right, you're going to have to spend a lot of time, but there can be baby steps along the way. And so you might not want to jump into what Patagonia does or an REI does, which, REI is even investing in fiction films. That's not right for every brand. And very few CMOs are going to wait for that process to play out. So, doing short form stuff that you can do cheaper and quicker and start proving the model and proving to yourself and to your colleagues or whoever you need to convince at your company that a smaller story can be done, within a price point and a time period, and then you can start to take the bigger steps. And I think that can also help you slowly build up that trust as a brand that this is something that's right for you. But the truth is, you've nailed it, is the tenure of CMOs and the people that work with them worried about that tenure issue, as well as the quarterly results part of it, is what usually makes it really hard for this stuff to work. Because no one, and I'm sure people have said this to you on other interviews, but no one gets fired for saying, let's do another advertisement usually, because that's tried and true. And this is something that's a little bit more of a risk, and it's harder to convince your colleagues, why are we making this feature-length documentary about X when we could be making a product video, and that leads potentially directly to sales we can point to. But I think there is an element of everyone kind of knows that there's always been that 50% of your ad budget is wasted and you don't know what 50% is, whoever the famous person was that said that many years ago. And so you're taking a leap of faith in the advertising sector too, and the things that we think are tried and true. Like, is there really the metrics behind some of those things? Not always. And so experimentation should always be some part of your budget mix. And one part of that experimentation budget can be in brand storytelling, I think.
In your experience, what gives you the confidence to go, this is a worthy investment for brands?
It's a great question. It varies with each client that we're working with, but it's usually when I feel like they've taken the time to find the project that is going to be a win for them, whether or not it ends up selling to Netflix. It's great if we, in theory, it's great if you sell it to Netflix or whoever, but if you know that it's worth you having done this, even if it ends up being distributed in some smaller way or a different way, it still aligns enough with your values that it was a worthy endeavor. Like, that's the project we're looking for, is that it's going to be worth having done it no matter what. I don't know if that answers the question. But
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, before I let you go, I've got my 5 thoughtful questions. They are no longer rapid fire because they're not rapid, as I've learned. What's a story that's had an impact on your life and why?
Gosh, like a story that I've worked with a brand?
Could be anything. It could be a book, could be a movie, could be a story that you've consumed that was really impactful for you.
That's a great question. I mean, it is a brand project, but I'll bring it up because it did have an impact. When I was first working with Yeti, they decided to do a feature-length documentary on, which ended up being called Charge. It's the story of Eduardo Garcia, who was a rising star chef who was out hunting, and he saw a dead bear on the ground, and he was just naturally curious. but wanted to kind of check it out. And so he pulled out his knife and went to make sure the bear was dead, kind of. And when that happened, he was shocked by 1,000,000 volts of electricity on the spot. He didn't realize that the bear had dug up an electrical cable in the back country and was electrocuted. And then he was electrocuted, was blown backwards, and should have died on the spot, and somehow walked himself to civilization and rebuilt his life. And I'm getting choked up telling the story. And he told me that story when he was pitching it to Yeti in their Office Park headquarters. And I got teary-eyed. And I was like, if I'm getting teary-eyed in an Office Park in Austin, and this is the perfect story for Yeti, because part of his recovery was getting back outdoors.
Right.
He was an outdoorsman, and that's what helped him recover. But he also, the reason it stuck with me is it made him really think about what he values in life and the people he values in life. And that was also what brought him back. And so seeing him go through those challenges and rebuild his life was really inspirational. And so it happened to be a story that a brand funded, but it was one that, you know, when I meet people, I want to introduce them to him. He's someone who's changed my life, knowing him as a friend. So that would be the story.
Amazing. What's one film you think everyone should watch?
So my go-to answer with this is always Rules of the Game by Jean Renoir, which is a 1930s film. And it's a famous film that many film geeks would say that everyone should watch. But it's one of these films that is a very convoluted tale, actually. And a lot of the story is told through the mise en scène. It's through what you see in the background of the film. So you have to pay really close attention because things will be happening in the bottom left of the screen that are crucial to the story. And it's just a masterwork in like great cinema making. And it's also, the rules of the game is the rules of life. And that's what it's about, is kind of getting to know the rules of the game. And so that's the one I recommend to everyone.
Amazing. What's something you never leave home without?
Wow. Something I never leave home without. I usually forget all the things that I should not leave home without, like my keys or something like that. But I think that right now, well, I have to never leave home without an EpiPen because I have severe allergies to a lot of things that will send me to the hospital. I've been to the hospital 5 times with anaphylaxis.
Oh, wow.
So I never leave home without 2 Benadryl and an EpiPen in my pocket. And I try to make sure it's always a water bottle so that I'm not buying some plastic water bottle, but I never leave home without the EpiPen and the Benadryl.
What's an important place for you to go to find inspiration?
So my favorite activity in life is swimming, but and that clears my head and lets me think of other things. But where I usually get inspiration is in long walks through cities or outdoors in nature. It can be either one. It can literally be like, you know, walking in the Sundance Resort, you're in this beautiful nature and that's amazing. And that'll give you inspiration and great ideas. But for me, it can be in London, you know, it can be through some new city and doing that. Like I can walk for 10 hours and that to me is the core thing.
Amazing. Last question. What's the most important skill for a storyteller to develop?
Wow. Well, there's probably several others, but I think it's the ability to take constructive feedback from your team members, meaning producer or editor, you know, DP, people involved in the making of the film. It could be the brand you're working with, but I'm thinking more core, the creative team you're working with, and be able to take that creative criticism to make the better movie. Because a lot of times a filmmaker, I've learned, any filmmaker, they can get in their head, you know, this idea of the auteur director, and it's, you know, their way or the highway kind of thing. But oftentimes those collaborators can help you make it into something even better than you thought it could be.
Amazing.
Yep.
Thanks so much for your time, Brian.
Thank you.